On August 3rd, Alibaba shipped a 2.4 trillion parameter model, and the internet decided the AI race had broken. Here is the part almost nobody checked. The benchmark's Qwen3.8-Max wins are, in part, benchmarks with the word Qwen in the name. And on the public software engineering tests, Alibaba's own table shows it losing by as much as 15 points. 72 hours later, the first independent index came back at 53, behind Kimi K3, another Chinese model. This is the deep dive. Start with the timeline, because it explains most of the confusion. On July 19th, Alibaba put out something called Qwen3.8-Max preview across its token plan, coder, and coderwork surfaces. Developers tested it that week. Then on August 3rd, the same name appeared again, this time without the word preview, and Hacker News lit up. 1,108 points, 606 comments on the release post. 2 announcements, 2 weeks apart, 1 model name. A lot of coverage treated the second one as if it were the first. What actually shipped on August 3rd is a model card and an API, not a download. The official post is titled A New Bar for Coding and Co-Work, and its second sentence is the one developers cared about. This marks the first time Alibaba will open source the weights of a Max class model, with those weights promised the following week on Hugging Face and Model Scope. Until then, Qwen3.8-Max lives behind Alibaba's cloud. Alibaba also said a 27 billion parameter sibling, Qwen3.8-27b, goes open weight at the same time. So we checked whether the weights had landed. Querying Hugging Face's model API for everything published by the official Qwen organization, sorted by last modified. The newest official upload is dated July 22nd, and it is a speech recognition model. As of this recording, there is no Qwen3.8-Max and no Qwen3.8-27b under the official account. Third-party repositories carrying those names already exist, staged by the community, sitting at 0 downloads. The promise is still a promise, about 4 days out from its own deadline. Now the machine itself. Qwen3.8-Max is a mixture of experts model, 2.4 trillion parameters in total, but only about 95 billion of them active for any single token. That ratio is the entire design philosophy. You pay to store an enormous model, but you only pay to compute a thin slice of it per token, which is how something this large can be priced at $2 per million input tokens at all. For scale, Moonshot's Kimi K3 carries 2.8 trillion total parameters. The context numbers are unusual even by 2026 standards. Maximum input is 991,000 tokens, dropping to 983,000 once thinking is switched on. Maximum output is 131,000 tokens either way. And the reasoning budget, meaning the space the model is allowed to think in before it answers, goes up to 262,000 tokens. That is a model permitted to write a novel's worth of internal monologue before it says a single word to you. Remember that number. It comes back. 2 engineering choices tell you exactly who this was built for. First, Alibaba exposed a reasoning effort dial with 3 settings, low, medium, and extra high, and shipped extra high as the default. Second, its cloud speaks OpenAI's chat completions and responses formats, and an Anthropic-compatible interface as well. In plain terms, you can point Claude Code or Codex at a Chinese model by changing a base URL. Alibaba is not asking developers to migrate. It is asking them to swap one line. Here is where the coverage and the evidence part ways. Alibaba published a comparison table, and headlines summarized it as beating GPT-5.6 Sol and Claude Fable 5 on many benchmarks. That is technically true, but read the row labels. On PaperBench it posts 93.0 against Sol's 90.5. On ifbench, 82.8 against 72.7. On JobBench, 53.4 against 45.4. Those are real wins. Then you reach the coding rows, and the names get interesting. Two of the coding benchmarks in Alibaba's table are called QwenSWEBench and QwenQoderBench. On QwenSWEBench, the model scores 80.7 against Seoul's 73.5. On QwenQoderBench, 58.4 against 53.8. We are not saying those tests are dishonest. Vendor-built evaluations are completely normal and often genuinely useful. We are saying that a benchmark carrying the vendor's own product name in its title is not the same class of evidence as one the vendor did not build. So look at the public software engineering tests, the ones Alibaba did not build. SWE-bench Pro, Qwen3.8-Max scores 67.7 against Claude Fable 5's 80.0. DeepSWE version 1.1, 56.6 against 70. FrontierSWE, 73.5 against 88.8. Those are gaps of 12, 13, and 15 points, and every one of them is printed in Alibaba's own table. The blog post is titled A New Bar for Coding. On the 3 hardest independent coding benchmarks it lists, it is not the bar. The pattern holds outside coding too. Terminal Bench version 2.1, 86.6 against Seoul's 88.8. Humanities Last Exam, 43.6 against 47.2. Long Context Recall on MRCR version 2, 92.9 against 93.8. GPQA Diamond ties Fable 5 at 92.6 and trails Seoul's 94.1. The genuinely strong result is computer use. On OS World Verified it posts 86.1, ahead of Fable 5's 85, Opus 4.8's 83.4, and Seoul's 83.2. That is a real, independent, first-place finish. It is also the one nobody put in a thumbnail. Now the independent number. Artificial Analysis, which runs its own harness rather than reprinting vendor tables, scored Qwen3.8-Max at 53 on its intelligence index. For context, on the same index snapshot dated August 5, Claude Opus 5 leads at 60.7, Claude Fable 5 sits at 59.9, GPT-5.6 Sol at 58.9, and Moonshot's Kimi K3 at 57.1. 53 puts Qwen3.8-Max just outside the top 10 of the 168 models on that board. Excellent. Not the Frontier, and not the top Chinese model. The more interesting measurement is how it got there. Running that index, Qwen3.8-Max emitted 150 million output tokens. The median for reasoning models in its price tier is 63 million. It spent roughly 2.5 times the median in generated text to reach its score. That is the 262,000 token reasoning budget showing up on the invoice. Cheap per token stops meaning cheap when the model writes 2.5 times as many of them. Run the arithmetic yourself. At $6 per million output tokens, 150 million tokens is $900 of output to complete one evaluation suite. A median model at 63 million tokens, priced at the tier's median output rate of $10 per million, comes to 630. That is our arithmetic on published figures, not a vendor claim, and it points the opposite direction from the price sheet. The $2 headline is real. The invoice is a different quantity. Speed tells the same story twice. Artificial Analysis clocks output at 46.5 tokens per second against a 72-token median for its tier. A separate independent tracker, measuring on August 5th, got 46 tokens per second against a field median of 91, with time to first token at 45.51 seconds. You wait 3/4 of a minute before the first character appears. Simon Willison asked it to draw a pelican on a bicycle. 11 minutes. 29,734 output tokens, about 17 cents, and it forgot the wheels. Rival coordinates, starting with the one Alibaba addressed directly. Alibaba claimed Qwen3.8-Max ranks first in China among text models on Arena, and second worldwide for models analyzing visual material. Those placements have not been confirmed by an independent benchmarking organization. Kimi K3's have 57.1 on artificial analysis, fourth on the board, verified. Korean coverage on August 4th framed this launch not as Alibaba passing America, but as Alibaba catching up to Kimi K3. Two Chinese labs, and Qwen is the challenger. Kimi K3 is not a clean winner either, and that matters for anyone actually choosing. K3 sits first on Arena's front-end coding leaderboard on 483,000 blind human votes, and it finished last out of 7 models on an agentic repair harness, resolving 79% of issues. In one independent architecture test spanning 269 files across 2 real projects, Kimi K3 scored 83 out of 100, and the Qwen3.8-Max preview scored 80. Different tests, different winners. Nobody in this pair is dominant. Widen the frame, and the Chinese cluster gets dense. On that August 5th index, Kimi K3 at 57.1, Qwen3.8-Max at 53, GLM 5.2 at 51.1, DeepSeek V4 Flash at 49.9, Minimax M3 at 44.4, DeepSeek V4 Pro at 44.3. For separate Chinese labs inside a 13-point band, and several of them ship open weights. The competitive pressure on Alibaba is not primarily coming from San Francisco. It is coming from the lab down the road. And the number that actually justifies the excitement is a boring one. Qwen3.7-Max, released in May, sits at 46.0 on the same index. Qwen3.8-Max sits at 53. That is 7 points of composite intelligence in roughly 11 weeks from one lab, on a metric that lab does not control. 7 points is about the distance between GPT-5.4 and GPT-5.6 Terra on the same board. The story here is not that Qwen passed anyone. The story is the slope. So why does this matter? The open weight promise is historically significant and practically theoretical. A 2.4 trillion parameter checkpoint means hundreds of gigabytes of files and multi-GPU serving. Essentially, nobody self-hosts that. What actually changes hands next week, if the schedule holds, is Qwen3.8-27b, the sibling that fits on a single card. Its predecessor, Qwen3.6-27b, scores 37.0 on the same index and is widely treated as the best model you can genuinely run at home. That home scale line is where the real adoption lives. Developers on Hacker News describe running the previous 27 billion model at 4-bit quantization inside 18 gigabytes of video memory, and a 1-bit build small enough to sit on a 16-gigabyte Mac Mini at 4 to 6 tokens per second. Meanwhile, the API price, $2 in and $6 out, undercuts Kimi K3's 3 and 15. Alibaba is competing on cost and on distribution at the same time, from both ends of the hardware curve. What to watch next? First, whether the weights actually appear around August 10th on Hugging Face and Model Scope, and under what license. The license terms were not specified at announcement, and a max-class model under a restrictive license is a very different event from one under a permissive license. Second, whether independent coding evaluations, the arenas, and the agentic harnesses confirm or contradict Alibaba's table over the next 2 weeks. Right now, that table is the only detailed evidence anyone has. Third, the tape. Using closing prices pulled from Yahoo Finance data, Alibaba's U.S.-listed shares closed at $122.25 on July 31st, $127.30 on launch day, August 3rd, and $128.49 on August 5th, up about 14% from July 24th. NVIDIA closed August 5th at $221.83, up 4.7% on the day. We are reporting the numbers, not explaining them, and none of this is investment advice. And Alibaba shipped again on August 5th, with Qwen3.0-Image Pro. To close, a genuinely strong model shipped, from a lab moving 7 index points a quarter, at a price that pressures everyone in the market. That is the real story, and it is a big one. What is not the story is that the benchmarks broke in China's favor. The wins are concentrated in tests Alibaba named. The losses sit on the public ones, and the first independent score placed it behind a Chinese competitor. Read the row labels, not the thumbnail. If you want the numbers, check this carefully every day. Subscribe to AI Daily. We will be watching for those weights.